Well, good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible study. We're in the book of Ecclesiastes. If you want to open up, we're going to go through 8 and 9 and kind of break it up into a couple of different sections as we go through it. There's some handouts in the back for the class that's here. So we're going to look at 5 qualities of a good leader. Sounds real tinny, doesn't it? No? Okay. 5 good qualities of a leader, and then mysteries beyond human wisdom, where we are not going to be able to understand. And then we're going to take a look at God-centered philosophy of life. And then the last one is we're going to take a look at how do we put this all together? How do we pull it all together? So as we go through this, it's one of the fundamental things that we're always looking for in our lives is what is its purpose? What have we been doing this for? And how do we find peace, tranquility, all those things that give a balance to our life? So before we continue, let's go and have a word of prayer. Our most blessed and loving Father, once again, we come here this evening to study your word. We pray that you would be with us as we begin this study. Help us, Father, to say everything in a way that is appropriate and meaningful towards your wisdom, and that we'd be able to draw from it and shape our lives into the Christian that we need to be. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. So if you're joining us live on Facebook or YouTube, you can go ahead and drop in any comments, questions, concerns about what we're talking about, engage in the class. I have our social media stuff up, so I'll be able to catch it. So if you'd like to do that, we'd appreciate it. If you're watching it in the future, you can also drop things in the comments, and I do still respond to them, unless you're going to watch it 50 years from now, and I don't think I'll be here, but oh well, somebody will. Okay, so as we've looked at this, we've saw his journey, starting out at the beginning of the book, trying to find satisfaction, trying to find justice, trying to find all these things that when you look around a world without a view of God, it's pretty meaningless. It's very difficult for us to try to understand what's going on around us. So we try to fill that void, and there's things and activities in which we have to do in our lives, and we try to find that joy in those pursuits, whether they're pleasure, whether they're seeking after a career, whatever it might be. But he says it comes up really short when it's without God. In the first section of this book, that's looking at the world horizontally, looking down under the sun and assessing the world. This is what, in a lot of ways, an atheist, the way they live their lives is because they don't believe in God. They don't believe in anything supernatural. So to them, their life is always going to come up short of true happiness. Happiness that they could achieve. They may think they've achieved some happiness, but without God, it's not there. So Solomon has done everything to try to find this. Now, he turned for a while and he looked at and he said, look, the one thing as well that's so critical in this journey that we have is that we need to remember that the way we worship as well can be falling under that vainness, that making it shallow and superficial. So tonight when we look at this and we look at wisdom applied, we talk about that, and I've said it several times, when you talk about wisdom applied, wisdom is taking your knowledge, and being able to use it in an appropriate way at the right time, having that knowledge and then making it useful in a way that's appropriate. A lot of people have knowledge, but they can't necessarily put it into action. When we look at wisdom and we consider that it is something that when we apply it to our lives, it brings strength, balance, and insight. When we don't have that, that's where we become weak, unbalanced, and we don't have that ability to look and understand what's going on around us, and we make bad decisions. So, for example, when we're treated unfairly at church or at home, a lot of times, how do we react? We react impulsively instead of trying to, what I call, pause, pray, and ask. Pause, pray, and ask. When you ask, you need to ask yourself, what response is going to be showing trust in God and keeps me balanced, and actually helps rather than makes the situation worse. So we have to choose a way that is calm and a measured response. And that takes a lot of self. So when we look at wisdom being applied, we see that it has that strength, that balance, and gives us that insight. So at the beginning here in chapter 8, verse 1, he starts to talk about leaders and focuses on that. And this could be a leader in the family, the way I look at this. It could be a leader at your job, with your shift supervisor, a manager, or something like that. Military leader, a leader in the congregation. Maybe you're a spiritual role or an elder, but you have this. These are things that we look at, that we see, and we go, that's a good leader. We can see these things in them. And then we know what bad leaders are. They always seem to stand out more, don't they? We seem to really pick those up quickly. Why? Well, because some of them are promoted without their true ability. We see that a lot in the job, in the world, where people are promoted, and they've gone beyond it. They were really good at what they were doing. Fantastic. And I saw that a lot where, nurses, fantastic nurses, then became a manager. Terrible manager. What was interesting is everybody thought, yeah, pick that person. They're an amazing nurse. Yeah, they will understand. They will. And then 6 months later, they're like, oh, man. They don't know anything about management. And you see things like that. Some are egotistical, right? They want the power, their ability. They want the power. So not all leaders are wise. And not all are going to have equal wisdom. Some leaders are going to have more ability of wisdom in their leadership and stuff. So there's not a perfect level. You can say he is a wise and he is not. But I think we understand the abstract, as far as the differences between the two. And they're important. So he starts out in the first part of verse 1 of chapter 8. And he asks a question. It's kind of like, how can this occur? Like, who is the wise man? And who knows the interpretation of a matter? That's what you want. You want somebody who can do this. And so he's asking a question, as far as, is there anyone who really is like a wise man and can understand the interpretation of a matter? Can he have the clarity of looking at a situation and being able to determine define it, what's going on, what is the consequences, what's happening, and then be able to understand the situation? I mean, don't start solving the problem. We're just talking about consider what's going on. And that's one of the steps where, some leaders don't have a clear mind. They jump. They're impulsive. They don't take time to think and consider. Some of the people that, I looked up to in the military that were fantastic leaders, they made quick decisions, but you could see that they had thought them through, either experienced them before, and then sometimes some things that you'd see get outside their wheelhouse, as we would say, they would pause. And then I saw bad leaders that it didn't matter. They always had an answer. It's like, okay, we've never dealt with this. This is not something we trained for. This has never been a mission we've done. But boy, they got an answer. They haven't sat and considered everything, interpreted the situation. So a good leader has a clear mind, one that can not rush to judgment or react hastily as he's going through there. And so the second part reveals another characteristic trait, which is a cheerful disposition. A man's wisdom illuminates him and causes his stern face to beam. And a lot of times when you see leaders that are under difficult situations, you read the look in their face. And you can, we call them tells, body language, facial micro signals and stuff. They got body language experts if you ever watch them. But we do that and we read faces far better than what we think we do. Mm-hmm. Talk to them and all of a sudden you go, oh, look, you don't even know you're doing it. Mm-hmm. That's called that intuitiveness. I don't like that guy, or man, there's something about him I just like, that's the disposition. That's the thing you have. And so leaders that are under under this type of duress or having to, perform and lead, when you look at them, the wisdom illuminates them. You can see that it's not that they're going to handle everything, but you know that they have the capabilities to cope with it. And maybe they're not going to come up with the best plan. But it also, on the leader's side, the confidence it gives you in knowing, I may not know the answer right now, but I absolutely understand the problem. Because I was clear thinking, my mind was clear, and I was able to assess everything, define it, and then see what the repercussions were going to be, what the result is, and then start from there. And that gives you a process as a wise leader to where then your disposition is unshakable. There's a part where it's like, okay, we got this. I don't know how, but we got this, And you see that with some. And then some bad leaders, you just see immediately the panic. I know I use my military experience a lot, but it does help because one of the key things when I went through officers candidate school was not to let the troops read it in your face. Now, isn't that interesting? It was like, they love to do that. They would get in your face and just start while you're trying to do a mission. We play different roles. We'd play commander. We were responsible for everything. We had to take care of everything. We had to tell the cooks how much meals, everything. And if one little thing went wrong, those TAC officers would jump on us like drill sergeants. And they would not let up. And even then, you're trying to make a decision and make a correction, and they're still screaming in your face. And we had this one guy that, man, he couldn't take it. He literally, you could see his face turn red like a beet. And I remember one day they stopped and they just leaned back, and Captain LaGrasso looked at him and said, "Come here, Bernard, let's go." And we thought, uh-oh. And we asked Bernard, "What did they do?" He said, "They took me in to a mirror in the bathroom." I said, "What?" "Yeah, they made me stand there and look at myself." They said, "Now, would you follow someone like that?" Sweat coming off and just like, you could tell, he couldn't handle, so but it expresses this same type of wisdom to where when you see one of those qualities of a godly leader even, because he has the faith in God, right? He has a confidence in God, and he has the knowledge. And so he hopefully is not making decisions in haste. He's got a clear mind, but he has this foundation that he's so confident in, and it's God. And so it doesn't matter what rages around him, and they can have that. And not only that, but another part that I see with that wisdom in a leader is it's contagious. It's contagious. If my soldiers saw the panic in me, I saw the panic back in them. I could see it. If I showed that I was disgruntled about us doing something, I'm telling them, they become disgruntled. My attitude absolutely had a powerful effect. And so in a wise leader, they understand this. And inside, this is going like that maybe, but you know what? They have to have that in order to help. Because that's what a wise leader honestly is about. It's about helping. Not the ego, and not trying to prove something, but to try to be that stabilization factor in guiding, right? Guiding through something. And so it illuminates him, he says. The other thing you see in a wise leader that he talks about in verse 2 through 4, he says a discreet tongue. He says, "I say, keep the command of the king because of the oath before God. Do not be in a hurry to leave him. Do not join in an evil matter, for he will do whatever he pleases. Since the word of the king is authoritative, who will say to him, 'What are you doing?'" Again, I can't help but think, especially when you consider the way that Solomon's talking, and he is a king himself, and the way that authority is ruled, it is very similar in the military. One, you made an oath. You made an oath, and so that oath is ultimately in the military as an officer. Your commission comes directly from the President of the United States. When I took my oath of office as an officer, I swore allegiance to the President, not Congress, not some general, but to the commander-in-chief. And I took that so seriously because to me, I honored that position because of that fact. And that gave me the biggest goosebumps when I took that oath. And I read that later because I knew whatever command came down, unless it was immoral, to disregard. But I didn't question it because I had confidence and I had an oath. And so that's what he's kind of talking about this. And this abandonment, is loyalty. When he says, don't be hurried to leaving. How quickly, the people will then all of a sudden abandon that oath that you have taken, that loyalty. A good leader won't do that. And this really ties into something else when he talks about joining into an evil matter. I don't know how many times. Has anyone ever seen what was that? Cain Mutiny with Humphrey Bogart. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's been remade. Cain Mutiny by Humphrey Bogart is in it. And you'll see all of this. They made us watch it. And it teaches you a lot. And it has all these elements in it about his junior officers and the way they start questioning him. And then they basically take command away from him. It goes to a court martial. But it really does bring out all of these kind of aspects where, you have a loyalty to your supervisor. You stepped up. That's the way I feel. If you step up and you say, I will manage this department. I will be a shift lead. You're stepping up and you're saying to that next supervisor, you don't have to like them personally, but you need to be loyal. And don't go behind their back. Don't sit there, and that's kind of what he's seeing here. Don't join in this chatter or backstabbing, going around. What will happen? Respect it. Keep your commitment. If you don't like it, quit. Right? Express yourself. Try to do the best you can. Use respect in the way that you communicate it. And then if you can't live with that, then separate. And avoid that reckless talk. I never said anything bad about my commander. And I had some bad commanders. But I would never say anything in front of my troops. Even though I'd agree with them. Someone would come and complain, and I'd sit there inside them going, yeah, you're probably right, but you know what? It's his command. There's the way we're going to do it. We're going to do it better. We're going to try to make this better, but it's so quick for us people who are bad leaders, to just side anyway, just flow back and forth, right? And then can you trust them later? If they're that flippant like that and they can't have loyalty to a direct supervisor, how do you think they're going to represent you? I call that, they're going to throw you under the bus. When they say, well, come in here, Captain Harry, what about that sergeant? Oh, he's terrible. Part of my job as well as a leader was to take care of them and protect them. And that's the whole purpose of that position of authority, is not just respect and honor and carry out, but also take care of the area of responsibility you have. And those people are your resources. They've been entrusted to you to accomplish something. So, and what are you going to do? You're going to tell the king what to do? And I did. I had a captain tell me one time, because I was in there really, I guess, trying to give him too many suggestions because I was a brand new lieutenant and I knew so much. And I remember he just grinned at me, it's Captain Cook, and he looked at me and he goes, Lieutenant Aaron, when you're command, you can do whatever you want. He said, but I'm the captain. And I said, I just smiled and grinned and go, thank you, sir. You're absolutely right, And that's like, it's so easy to criticize. But if you're in charge, okay, then it's yours. And a good leader understands this as well. It shows that loyalty. And even in the church, it's the same rule. If you've been entrusted in a position that you're serving others, then you need to be that as well. You don't go around and talk about them to other people. you hold it to yourselves, you work with that person, you protect them as well. There's a lot of these as well, individual, because to me in the church, we're such a dynamic group that there are different sub-leaders. There are people who are still spiritually stronger than others and have influence. To me, those are leaders because they have an influence. And to me, then they have a responsibility as well to be a wise leader with others around them. The next thing he says is about discerning judgment, keen judgment, the ability to have this idea of understanding what's going on. In verse 8, 5a, he who keeps a royal command experiences no trouble. It sounds simple. Royal command is from the king. If you obey it, you're not going to get any trouble. Now, you might get some of the people that you're commanding below you, but you know what? The king's on your side, right? If you're obeying God, God's on your side. And so they have none. So a wise leader has that ability to know the proper time and the proper way to act. And he accepts the limitations and acts carefully when he's under that type of a pressure. And in the last 5, the second half and 6, he says, for a wise heart knows the proper time and the proper procedure. For there's a proper time and a proper procedure for every delight, though a man's trouble is heavy upon him. A wise man knows how to show that type of discernment even when things are overwhelming. And that's through maturity as well, through experience, is acting carefully and during that type of pressure. In verse 7, he goes on to say, if no one knows what will happen, who can tell him it will happen? There are just some things sometimes as a leader we don't know. We just, we don't know when it's going to happen. You can't predict it. And so, don't pretend you're in control of the future. You can control what the outcome is. Wise leaders have to be realistic. They may have the wisdom, but part of the wisdoms is I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen. You can't promise anybody anything as far as absolutes as well. You have to be able to be realistic with them. And so we have to trust, again, this is a foundation that has to be built upon God to be a good leader that's going to be able to spiritually guide people. I think one of the biggest ones is hard because of the ego that tends to come with power, is that a good leader needs to be humble. He needs to have that. In verse 8, he says, no man has authority to restrain me, with the wind, or authority over the day of death. There is no discharge in the time of war, and evil will not deliver those who practice it. So there are just certain things that a humble man understands. I'm not going to fight against the wind. I understand that. These are the opposites. It's like, a proud spirit will say, I can control the wind. I can control the day of my death. No, a humble one understands the limitations that he has as well. And in verse 9 with this, he says, and all this I have seen and applied my mind to every deed that has been done under the sun, wherein as a man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. That's a part of that lack of humility where, he repeatedly, we see people who are in power that actually do more damage than they do good. We can see that in home as parents, right? Overbearing, where, so that's where we have to ask the question. A good leader is going to ask himself, am I doing this to serve or to dominate? And a lot of times when a leader is pushed because of their pride, they'll push back and they'll try to show their domination, try to show the fact that, well, I'm still in charge. Granted, with some kids, reaches a point where you just say, I'm the dad, and I'm in charge. But I think we understand that there are some bad leaders who, need to ask themselves that question. Because regardless of your leader, you're serving. That's right. And this is one thing that we were also taught was, if you want to be a good leader, you have to be a good follower. That's right. If you can't follow, you can't lead. Amen. And I love that. I used to think of that a lot, The worst, they couldn't follow. They couldn't follow anyway. So that's the problem, this exercise of authority that a bad leader can inflict more harm is what Solomon is showing here. When he moves to the next section about there are just some things in life, that we're never going to understand. I was just listening to a podcast, and it's a Fraser Cain, and he's an astrophysicist and astronomy journalist, and he'll take questions. He talks plain language. That's why I can listen to him. But he takes some really interesting questions, and he does deep research and answers them. And one of them was, matter of fact, just yesterday, was he asked, will we ever get to a point where we have a question we can't answer? And I thought, of course. Now think about it. They're talking scientifically, right? Because they got science, and they figure, well, science is going to solve everything. And he did something, because, of course, now they think everything's the Big Bang. And, it all started in blue, right? And it started from that. And he said, you know what? We don't even know that question. Why? And he said, and if we did know why, and we ever get that answer, you know what? If we found out that it's because this widget did widget, we would then say, well, then why does the widget do the widget? And then you'd solve that, and you'd say, well, why did that do the widget that created the bang? In other words, it's a cycle. There are just some things. So when I heard that, I thought, wow, this, it's the same. And that's exactly what, there are just some things that we don't understand, because either we haven't found them, like I have up on the slide, God hasn't revealed them, and we know there's some things God will never reveal to us. Solomon started out the book, and he said, there's just some things that God's doing you're never going to grasp.
Yep, that's right.
Even if he told you, we
right.
probably wouldn't grasp it. That's probably why he doesn't tell us. But boy, we want to know. And then there are always going to be some things that are just beyond us, that are happening around us. And so there's three mysteries that Solomon kind of reveals in this text when we go through it. The first one is this, what we see all the time is the triumph of the unjust. In verse 10 and 11, actually going through 13 we'll read. So then I've seen the wicked buried, those who used to go in and out of the holy place, and they are soon forgotten in the city where they did thus. This too is futility, because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly. Therefore, the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. So that's that guy that goes to church all the time. He's saying, I've seen the wicked, and, they went in and out, they were in the temple, but he calls them what? He calls them, wicked. But they went to church. They went to the temple all the time. They were there all the time. And we know who they were. And yet when they died, they were quickly forgotten. And so he says that's fruitful. It's something of no value. Because this is why they do this, because they think that the sentence against them is not going to come. Somehow they think they're getting away with it because they can go to the temple, they can go to church, and they feel like, well, I'm okay. I haven't been struck by lightning yet. The old joke, if I ever go to church, it'll collapse around me. I've heard some people, if I go to church, it'll, because you don't walk out and God doesn't strike you or slap you down because you're evil, you think you're getting away with it. That's kind of what these guys were thinking, I'm going to temple, look at me. And we look at them and we go, and so these are a part of that mystery where we see that triumph over it. Going on in 12 and 13, he says, although a sinner does evil 100 times and may lengthen his life, still I know that it will be well for those who fear God, who fear him openly. But it will not be well for the evil man, and he will not lengthen his days like a shadow, because he does not fear God. That's kind of interesting because we know the shadow is going to shift. You cannot maintain the shadow. The shadow, the sun is based upon the projection against the sun. The sun's constantly moving. So, even though they can try to do this, it's not going to help them. They can get heart transplants. They can do all this. It doesn't matter. They're not getting away from that fundamental judgment that's going to be coming against them. But he does know, I like the way he puts in here, that it will be well for those who fear God openly, not in the closet, not hidden. So the next mystery, the second one is unfair consequences. We see a lot of consequences we think are just wrong. There is futility which is done on the earth. That is, there are righteous men to whom it happens according to their deeds of the wicked. On the other hand, there are evil men to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I say this too is futility. What is that? We see good people suffer from evil, and we see evil people get rewarded with good. And that's just so wrong. You know? Now think about, this is Solomon, the wisest man that's ever lived. And even he couldn't really wrap his mind around some of this, how this is allowed to happen. My default understanding and answer to all of this is because of a sin-rotten world that's been inflicted by ourselves. And so things happen that are a resultant of evil consequences. Right place, wrong time. You know, I mean, we're living in a sin-infested world with sin-infested results that are going around us. The drunk who will disregard the law and drive and then hit somebody who is, you know, God-fearing, loving, innocent, and kill a whole family. I've seen that happen. You know, and it's just so horrifying to sit and think about that. I've had to give emergency aid to this individual who had killed a family. And I tell you what, that challenged me to the core. It still is just terrorizes me to look at that destruction he inflicted on that family in the other vehicle. And here I had to save his life. It was humbling. And that's the things that, you know, some of these things we're just not going to be able to completely understand them. And in the middle of all that's happening, it's interesting, while we see the triumph of the unjust and the unfair consequences, then all of a sudden there's this out of sync pleasure that we have life among us. It's like, he says, so let's read 15. He says, so I commended pleasure, for there is nothing good for a man under the sun except to eat and to drink and to be merry. And this will stand by him in his toils throughout his days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. In the middle of all of that, it's kind of, we're still enjoying things and we still have blessings that are coming to us. And I don't know, sometimes we miss it, but there's a lot of times where we're still enjoying it. We live through some tragic things maybe that have happened. We've watched some of these travesties, and then we have some pleasure and enjoyment in life, in other words. I'm not trying to be very specific, but because sometimes in the middle of a tragedy, maybe you have a grandson. You know, there's this mixture of, you know, like a mother having a baby, and then the mother passes away. But you got this beautiful child, something very special. This type of a double-connected relationship between this torturous world, and yet there's times that seem disjointed when all of a sudden we have this pleasure. And then you feel guilty. It's like, you know, I should be weeping and whining, and, you know, that's just another one of those that he says is kind of, that we have this toil in our lives, and yet we still can enjoy things. And it's kind of one of those. So I don't know if I'm explaining that as well as I want to, but, and then 16, 18. And then I gave my heart to know wisdom and to see the task which has been done on the earth, even though one should never sleep day or night. And I saw every work of God. I concluded that man cannot discover the work which has been done under the sun. Even though man should seek laboriously, he will not discover. And although the wise man should say, I know, he cannot discover. There's some reality to it. You know, there's just some reality to the things that we look around that sometimes are just beyond us, and even the wise man. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
going back to what you were saying about, you were saying that sometimes something happens and it's a terrible thing, but something good comes out. And I was gonna, actually, I almost forgot what I was gonna say. But sometimes you can have something in your life that you may think is I'm not gonna say a curse, but you may not think it's a blessing, but it's in your life, and then later on you find out, well, I thank God for that. That was actually a blessing in my life. This person or a situation or something, you find out that it's actually a blessing, but you didn't know it at the time, and you probably were asking God, God, why did this happen, or why did that happen? And then later you find out, well, I'm glad that did happen. You look back on it or something, and you say, well, that was really a blessing.
Yeah, sometimes I'm going to restate it because they can't hear you on live stream. I'm looking at the audio level. But yeah, what Lorenzo was saying is that many times these terrible things that happen and we witness around us, out of that comes something very beautiful, very precious as a resultant from that. And it's hard for us to understand that, well, maybe that was something that was necessary. We don't ever want to really say, I'm glad it happened, because you're not. But if it hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have been able to enjoy this other blessing. One of the strangest things that was told to me when my dad was killed and I was 20, I just turned 20, and this older man told me, he said, a friend of my friend's dad told me this. He looked at me and he goes, well, on the day your dad died, you became your own man. I was so angry when he said that. I thought that's the dumbest thing to say. 40 years later, I thought, man, he's right. I didn't live in his shadow. I had to grow up in many things. I became, a better person, appreciative of it, and I was angry and bitter going through it, and I could not see. I was so mad when he said that. And then I looked around and I saw people that had their dads, and the way they talk about them, and I got so angry. But there was something that did help me, that changed and helped give me strength to go through those things. And so that is a very good point. And it's bizarre, isn't it? It's beyond our comprehension. So I think that's a good way of helping to clarify this point that Solomon was trying to bring out. So now as we go into 9, he's going to come back around 4 truths that he sees that are absolutes. So when we say a truth, it's like a truism. It's something that's absolute. These are things that, no doubt. So he starts in verse 9:1. He says, for I have taken all into my heart and explained it that righteous men and wise men and their deeds are in the hand of God. God is sovereign. This is, in other words, God's in charge. And that's what I've said earlier, I think in this lessons that we've done, that when we look around and we get so caught up with all the news reports and all the negativity and all the conflict and anger and violence that we see, and then we become consumed with that, it's like, have we forgot? God is sovereign. God's in charge. And whatever's happening, like you were saying, tying back to, maybe that's a blessing. I know that Judah and Israel never saw anything good about them being invaded by the Assyrians. But God prophesied, didn't he, as we're going through Isaiah? It said, no, there's going to be something beautiful come out of this. And it did. And so, a lot of times we look around and we need to go back and understand that we're very narrow in our view, and we forget about the fact that everybody is in God's hand. There's no exception.
That's right.
Not just us Christians. And I don't mean in the hand of he's taking care of them providentially and caring and nurturing. I mean in control, that type of hand. And so that's something we have to keep. That's a truth. The second one, pretty obvious. Death is certain. And look what he says in the first, all the way through the first half of 3. It is the same for all. There's one fate for the righteous and for the wicked, for the good, for the clean, and for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice and for the man who does not offer a sacrifice. As the good man is, so is the sinner, as the swearer is. So is the one who is afraid to swear. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun. There is one fate for all man. And even though we look around and there's those things that we don't understand that are happening, we have to understand, one, God's sovereign. Secondly, death is going to bring it to an end. And judgment's going to come. Justice will be delivered. The third one is honestly kind of a description of our nature because of the fallen state, because of sin, of what is, and I'm not going to say inherited, because I don't like that word in a sense, but because of the nature that we have created in our culture under the sun, then all of our hearts are basically corrupt. I think that's what David was saying, and not saying that his mother was an evil woman, but that when he says that he was conceived, in sin, he's not talking about his mom had an adulterous relationship or that he had this sin that he got from Adam, but the fact that the nature of who we are is that we live in a sinful world. From the time we start getting our own conscious and understanding, we start violating, don't we? It seems to be an unnatural nature that we have inflicted on ourselves, not God, but what we have done. And so the second part of 3 says, furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards, where do they go? Dead. They're not getting away with it. And that's where we are so blessed to have God and to have Christ. Is it because we also, too, as Christians, have that in our hearts. We start out that journey before we come to the understanding of the need of the blood of Christ even. But this is what the world, that's a truth that's out there, and most people have this in their hearts. Unfortunate nature, I call it. The fourth one is, where there is life, there is hope. That's why I always tell people, it's never too late, right? Are you breathing?
That's right. That's right.
If you're breathing, there is hope. I talked to this one young kid that was a college kid, and he was suicidal, and it was because he was failing college. Now, I didn't do that out loud. I didn't do that to him, but I just looked at him and I said, then you need to go pick daisies. I said, go be happy. Because I asked him the question. I said, so do you know what's going to happen when you die? No, but it's got to be better. I said, how do you know it's better? Who told you it was better? And I mean, because it's unethical for us as medical providers to talk religion per se, but it was just absurd to me to think that if you're still breathing, you can get away from something. You can change. You still have control, don't you? And so that's what he says here in 4:9. For whoever is joined with the living, there's hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know they will die. But the dead, they do not know anything, nor they any longer have a reward. For their memory is forgotten. It's done. It's sealed. It's over. Now, it's kind of interesting because a dog in their society was not a pet. A dog was not a pet. A dog was the lowest animal. They were mostly feral scavengers. And so that's why it's kind of interesting. A lion, on the other hand, was something very valuable, had the symbolism of king and royalty and stuff. So the way Solomon is saying this, it's better to live as a dog, rejected and no value, than to be a lion that has all that value, but he's dead. So their memory's forgotten. Indeed, their love, their hate, their zeal have already perished, and they will no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun. So building your life around temporary emotions as well is something I kind of caught on here, looking at, all that emotion that they had and how they wielded those emotions, the lack of balance. At the end of the day, all that anger that you were firing out on people, trying to correct something, some injustice that's been afflicted upon you or whatever that is. When you're dead, it's done. And I used to say this, you're going to spend all your life miserable, angry, and then die. Live and be happy. Yes. You may have, the worst conditions going on around you, but when you're dead, it's done. So why do we mope around, hold these unwieldy emotions that are absolutely detrimental to our happiness in this immediate moment? And I have to do that to myself a lot of times. I have to recheck myself and go, whew, man, I got a great life. It's great. That's right. Amen. The other thing is, all those emotions, they're like radiation. They radiate on everybody around you. And I've seen that in different family members as well. Some that were very bitter and angry, and everybody that got around them was tense, walking on eggshells, right? And miserable. And I never wanted to go over to that family member's house. I dreaded ever. And then I had some aunts and some relatives like, yeah, let's go see Uncle so-and-so. And then there's some you go, no, don't go over there. Because they're always snippy and angry and miserable. And they're dead, by the way. Both of them, the happy and the miserable. And I think to myself, well, how sad to live your life totally controlled by that anger and that hatred that people hold under, because all those are going to be gone. So when we look at, now he comes in 9 and looks at some application, about contentment. Go then, eat your bread in happiness and drink your wine with a peaceful heart, for God has already approved your works. What you're doing is good. God approves of it. It may not be the quality you want, but, what have I said about the grass? Where is it? Where's it greener? It's under your feet. It's not over there. It's not behind you. It's what you have right there. And so a part of that contentment, I think, helps to balance the emotional rage that sometimes we allow to then pour out of us. Another one is this idea of spiritual purity. That when we look at ourselves and understanding the difference between the wisdom of the leaders or whatever it might be, a foundation of this wisdom of leaders and spiritual people is about the idea of purity spiritually, and this is what is interesting, the way we're familiar with this idea of white linen and such. But let your clothes be with white at all time, and let not oil be lacking on your head. A clean conscience, a severe devotion is what he's talking about. And that is some practical ways we can put it in it. And then, of course, faithfulness. In verse 9, enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, and which he has given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life and your toil in which you have labored under the sun. That's the betrayal in a marriage union is the most destructive in so many ways. I mean, it's a travesty in the echo effects that it has, and the lack of satisfaction with that union. And it's what I think is also reflected in our society when we look around, and many of the problems we have is because we've walked away from a pattern of what God has provided for us to be happy with. Mm-hmm. And if we have no God, then guess what? We're getting every man, woman, pleasure, whatever it is, and seeking it. And in the end, we're worse. It's worse. And they're more miserable. Yep. And it's harder. And so this is a reflection to, faithfulness. Now, I found it a little interesting because how many wives did he have?
Too many.
Too many. That's always a good answer, right? And so, in a sad way, he went through it. Another part is about our zeal. When he says in verse 10, he says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. For there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you're going. You can't plan, you can't postpone, you can't be a procrastinator. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. Mm-hmm. That's all you're going to be able to say, in Sheol. That's all there is. All right, so that's the lesson 10. So I hope you'll be able to join us this Sunday morning, 9:45 for Bible study. We're going to be looking at Mark, looking at the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. There's a little tease if you want to make sure you join us. 10:45 for worship, and then 4 p.m., and we'll be back here next Wednesday at 6 on lesson 11 in Ecclesiastes. Before we go, let's have a quick prayer. Our most wonderful and merciful, wise Father, who has been able to bless us with so many things and be able to especially provide us this beautiful work of wisdom that we can feed our spirit upon. We pray that tonight that we've been able to grow stronger in our wisdom and our ability to take it out and make it a real part of who we are. And we ask this in Christ's name, amen. Well, till we see you again, God bless.